So I'm here today with an old friend. I say old, I think we're both getting old. We were just talking about that. Steve Paget. Then myself and Steve both broke our necks. Steve nearly 40 years ago now. Me nearly 35 years ago. So we're kind of old hats about being in a wheelchair, using our blue badges, using car parks, things like that. So I'm a Cornwall councillor, new Cornwall councillor from West Country Haven. I've been a Truro City councillor for coming up 9 or 10 years now. And I'll just pass you over to Steve now to introduce himself.
Hi, my name's Steve Paget. I have been involved, as Steve said, I had my accident back in 1985, so I've kind of not celebrated my 40th anniversary of having my accident on the 17th of May. So it's quite a long time ago. So essentially I've been in a wheelchair twice as long as I was walking before I broke my neck. As Steve outlined, breaking our necks is quite a major event, and it realigns your life. And for the past 30 years now, I've been working in the voluntary sector. I kind of started off with Cornwall Mobility Centre, then moved with others to set up something in opposition to the Cornwall Disabled Association, which gave rise to an organisation or a charity called Aldis, which then led to another organisation called the Cornwall Disability Forum. Later they merged to become Disability Cornwall. Along the way I've had a quite extensive career with funding bodies, 5 years with the National Audit Charities Board, where I managed to change national policy on grants for organisations who wanted to fund disabled access only, whereas they would only fund disabled access if it was part of a major project. That changed the policy nationwide, and for that I received an MBE. What else have I done? I've also spent time working with Cornwall Council. I was chairing Cornwall Council adoption panel for I think that was about six or 7 years. I forget what else I've done, but I've done quite a few other things as well. But yeah, the list goes on.
Yeah, I think you were part of the continuing healthcare panels at one time.
No, I changed the continuing healthcare policy in Cornwall because I started along the way. I think it was when I was actually chairing the adoption panel for Cornwall Council. I realised that my knowledge of health and social care was slightly lacking, so I thought I'd study it through the Open University. I did that, and along the way I learned about continuing healthcare, and that because we were tetraplegic, it was possible for us to apply for it. And I did that, and I realised that actually what Cornwall were doing was applying the criteria incorrectly, and they were turning people down who should qualify. I used case law, and I used what I'd learned through studying, and eventually, after it took me 4 years, but I won, and it changed the whole face of continuing care in Cornwall. And then just to give me a bit of a lift, I sued them for maladministration, and I won that as well. So yeah, it was a win all round, really. And I gather you get it as well now, Steve.
Well, yeah, I eventually won it after quite a long legal battle for about 10 years. But I got to be honest, one thing that I admire about you is that you don't just think, right, I'm right, and I'll just go in and bulldoze it and I'll argue all day. You'll go back and get the facts. You'll go back and study it and sort it out. And then you'll come back and you'll present them with the evidence. And that's something that perhaps I can learn from you with the next 4 years of this administration at Cornwall Council.
I tried it the other way, Steve. I used to just bang my head and shout and scream, and it didn't get me anywhere. So I learned through experience that if you can present your argument and back it up with evidence, it pulls the rug from underneath them, and quite often you can prove their own legal advice. I mean, their own legal advisors were telling them that they were right and they were actually in the wrong. Yeah, it took me 4 years to get there, but I did get there.
So today we're talking about, apparently, and I never knew anything about this, Apparently, they have a Blue Badge Day every year, and that's coming up at the end of this month. And we decided, or Disability Cornwall, put out a survey asking people about their experiences with the Blue Badge, good, bad, and the ugly, I guess. And we're going to discuss the results here today.
Yeah, I think it came about through something we're going to discuss in another webcast later on. There's moves to transfer car parks, but today we're just going to focus on the Blue Badge parking survey and the 629 people who responded to the survey, which was pretty astounding response.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable response, especially locally when you put something on social media or something like that.
Absolutely.
You mentioned about the transfer of car parks. We are going to visit that in detail, but because of a new administration, everything, that's quite up in the air at the moment. But myself and Steve at Disability Cornwall, as well as the Rolling Ramblers and all that, and Ben Maguire and all that, MP, we're all really fighting to make sure that if it goes ahead, to make sure that exactly the same provisions, if not enhanced and improved for disabled people. So, keep an eye out for that, but we're actually putting them on alert, putting them on watch at the moment, that we're not letting them get away with something that is not going to improve the lives of disabled people when it comes to car parks. But back to this survey. So what surprised you most about it?
I think the biggest thing that stood out for me was that 80% of those surveyed would avoid venues with poor disabled parking. So if you look at the difficulties that business in Cornwall are experiencing at the moment, if disabled people are avoiding parking in towns where businesses are really struggling, that's basically turning away good business through just a lack of free accessible parking. There's quite a few other facts that kind of go along with that, because the survey also threw up that 63% of those surveyed couldn't pay for the parking because the systems themselves were inaccessible. So if you can't pay to use an accessible space, and you can't use it, then you can't then access the businesses perhaps that you want to visit and spend your money in. And that brings us on neatly to the Purple Pound, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. You often talk about the Purple Pound. It was something that I didn't know anything about until probably 5 years ago. And, the Purple Pound is so important, but it's just not something that's widely known. I don't even know if many businesses realize how important it is for their businesses. It's not just about being accessible. It's not just about, giving access to disabled people. It's about they got money to spend.
Yeah, the Purple Pound is an interesting fact. I think it's something like around about £240 billion in the UK. If you try and work out, and this is really difficult to do, trust me, and because I've sent you several emails with several different figures, trying to work out what the Purple Pound value is for Cornwall. As far as I can establish, it's somewhere between 140 million and 595 million in annual spending potential just for Blue Badge holders alone, which is not an inconsiderable amount of money.
I think it's really important as well. It's not just the disabled user. I very rarely go in town by myself and go to a restaurant or go to the theatre and all by myself or shopping. I would take friends, and those friends wouldn't be there a lot of the time, blowing my own trumpet as if I'm some kind of social magnet. But we bring people along with us. So they're part of this as well. They wouldn't be there if we couldn't park, have access to that restaurant and all. It's very rarely we're sitting alone, but we're often seen in isolation as just the disabled person. It's not, it's the disabled person, the carers, the family, the friends.
And that doesn't account either for the tourists visiting Cornwall either. So this is just for people living in the county. So if you factor in disabled tourism as well, and often they will bring their families, they will bring their support systems with them as well. So the spend value is considerable, And in Cornwall, we have a higher proportion of people with some form of impairment as well. You know, it's around 22%, which is quite a high level. So I think Cornwall needs to look at how blue badge holders are supported, and that would include
Also, something that I didn't realise till recently, because my van's always been part of the Cornwall permitted vehicle that you pay £10 to Cornwall Council, and I can park in all of the Cornwall Council car parks. And there's some car parks that you pay, I just never considered. You often look at blue badge holders where they can park anywhere, they get free parking everywhere. That's just not the case. Very often, you know, you have the space, but it's very often it's not free for us.
in private car parks, privately managed car parks, you have to pay. Blue badge holders are not exempt. When you look at the high number of blue badge holders in Cornwall, they don't actually need to park in a car park. They can park on street, which is great. But when you start to consider the chaos that can cause and the you shouldn't be parking and causing an obstruction, even if you have a blue badge. But it's probably safer for both the blue badge holder and safer for other road users if disabled people can park safely in a car park where perhaps they can park freely, as they would be able to do if they were on the street. Obviously, there are other challenges for those with limited mobility, and they need to park as close as they can to where they need to go. There's lots of different ways you can look at this. That's the beauty of the blue badge. It's quite adaptable to how and where you can use it.
Yeah, the other thing is, and certainly for myself, I'm not saying that all disabled people should be able to park in all car parks free. From my own personal thought is, why should we just park free just because we've got a blue badge and all that? I think it's great that Cornwall Council do those services, and I would totally fight to keep them. You know, poverty and struggling, the cost of living doesn't just hit blue badge holders, but it does disproportionately hit the elderly and blue badge holders and disabled. That's important as well. But there is plenty of blue badge holders that can pay. So very often it's looked at as we're trying to get something for nothing all the time. And that's just not the case.
That was an argument that was used by the council when we asked them to implement a permit system. The argument was that actually, if you have a disability, if you have an impairment that limits your mobility, the chances are you may go. Let's use Truro. You're a councillor. You've lived in Truro. You've been a councillor for Truro for many years, and the mayor. So you know how many car parks there are in Truro. So you may well go to one car park and visit one shop, but then you may have to move your car to another car park to visit somewhere else. So you may, shopping in a town or a city may involve you moving your car 2 or 3 times. Now, if you've got to pay on each single trip to that car park, those car parks, you could be paying quite a lot more than somebody who's able-bodied, who is able to walk the distances between the shops or the venues that you want to visit. So that was our argument as to why car parking should be free for those with the most severe impairments.
Yeah, I never seen it like that. And Truro is a perfect example, because just trying to traverse Truro in a wheelchair or with any walking aid or anything like that, even if you've just got a pushchair and all that, you don't need to be disabled in Truro to find it a real nightmare to get from one side to the other. We often, going slightly off topic, I often hear about them trying to put a crossing over Boscawen Street halfway down. And my argument is, thank you very much for the tokenism, but why should I walk down a terrible pavement or get down a terrible pavement to have a smooth crossing to go back down a terrible pavement? How about just sort the whole street and the pavements out so we can choose to cross the same places other people can cross?
Yeah, they had the same. They did the same thing in Falmouth. I'm not sure if you visited Falmouth much, but years ago they decided to rip the whole street up and put cobbles down, which And they said it wouldn't affect the disabled people because there would be crossing places and the cobbles wouldn't be sitting too much proud of the road surface, and it would be much better. What they did, they actually turned Falmouth into a complete no-go area for anybody with any form of mobility impairment. It's an absolute nightmare. They overspent, they didn't complete the project, and Falmouth Main Street looks a mess because of it. So there's lots of, whilst the history is important and I think it should be maintained to a degree, I think times have moved on, and access considerations, especially again when you look at the number of people with impairments in our county, need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, exactly. I think we could do a whole chat about accessibility, pavements, drop curbs and everything like that.
Absolutely.
You know, the amount of times I get up to the end of a pavement and there's no drop curb and you've got to go back. So going back to the survey, something that really stood out for me, and I never considered it at all, was the idea of temporary blue badges.
Yeah, I guess there's lots of people who, for one reason or another, through an accident or through temporary illness, would require a blue badge, and I see nothing wrong with that. As long as it's policed, and that is part of the problem we have in Cornwall. I think is that there is a lack of consistent approach to policing of the blue badge scheme.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's been moved over to the council now, because I might be wrong on this, but a moving offence is the police. It's sitting offence, like if you're parked on a pavement or your car's in the street or blocking a thing. Unless it's a main artery, it's all down to the council now. And as you know, 14, 15 years of, conservative and, just taking away funding and things like that has got rid of a lot of enforcement. It's really, really difficult to get enforcement on many things. Yeah, enforcement needs to be, and it, as much as it frustrates, I'm just thinking out loud now actually, so it may come out slightly wrong, but it must frustrate some able-bodied people when they see disabled people. Maybe they may feel like we're taking the mickey. They may feel like we can park anywhere, do anything. Well, it frustrates us as well when we get to parking spaces and all that, when they're abused and they're just used, well, I'm just going to pop in here temporarily. I'm only here 2 minutes. It doesn't really matter. And just thinking now, apparently there's no legislation what the width of a car park space should be. Perhaps if car park spaces were just wider in general, we wouldn't need to have as many disabled bays actually put aside in a car park just for us. It's just a thought out loud.
I think car parking spaces, the legislation or the recommendations surrounding that were designed in the 1950s, and just casting my mind back to facts and figures, but I can't remember I think they were designed in the recommended space sizes were goes back to the 90s. However, as you well know, vehicles have got much larger since that time, which is why a lot of large 4x4s end up parked in a accessible parking space because there's nowhere else for them to go.
Exactly. So going back to this survey, some of the feedback and actionable points, many people mentioned about applying for a blue badge. It was pretty much 50-50 whether they found it streamlined and easy. But some of the suggestions were strip out the evidence needed when they had to duplicate it several times. Just putting in again and again, putting in your prescriptions, putting in all these different things. There is already a way that many of us instantly, if we have a higher level of PIP or some mobility benefits, that should instantly, without us putting all the evidence in, instantly blue badge, because we've already been vetted on a much higher level anyway.
The system is full of inconsistencies, and there's not a lot of joined up thinking around any benefits or between government and local authorities, and perhaps that's something that in future having government IDs or some form of to make it a lot easier rather than having to go through these forms where you're having to repeat facts time and time again to different authorities to prove your need for benefits or you know.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it, it's
exactly.
a challenge. It's a constant challenge. You know, as well as I do, having a disability, you're constantly having to prove why you need something or why you need access to something. And the fact that 44% of those who responded to the survey said that they had difficulty or delays applying for their blue badge, I think speaks volumes for how important or how much understanding the authorities have about the needs of those who require blue badges.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You were talking before we started recording about the accessible machines, and I said that there isn't a parking machine that I can use. My hands are paralyzed, so you know I can't even draw out money with pressing the button because you've now got those covers now to stop people looking over it. Well, it means my hand doesn't go in there. All those kind of things, and parking machines have to be the worst, along with the most confusing signs in history.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's my own personal belief, and this isn't. I'm not speaking on behalf of any organisation or any representative body. I personally don't feel that there is any accessible method of paying for parking that is fully Equality Act compliant. That's my belief, and I would look forward to arguing it in court. To be honest, for all the reasons you point out, either the keypads are too high, or if you've got to punch in a number plate or details into a keypad, then the keypads themselves need to be much larger to enable you to do that. So in my view, I don't believe that any system at the moment is Equality Act compliant. And they argue about paying by phone through the app. There is a hidden charge there somewhere, so in effect you are paying more for parking than somebody who chooses to use the car parking machines in the car park. So whilst able-bodied people have choice, we don't have choice, and so therefore it cannot be. Therefore, paying by app would, in my view, is indirect discrimination.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we join the frustrations of the many. I've seen it on the news recently, and this isn't disabled people and all that complaining. The amount of people are complaining about the, I don't know, 10, 15 different apps, different things for different car parks, confusing and all that. And, you know, it takes me a good few minutes every time to go over and read the sign. There's so much writing on the signs and all that now that literally you got to go through and disabled badge holders have to pay unless the vehicle is adapted. And then some of them, is the vehicle adapted for the driver? Well, mine's not for the driver, mine's for me. So it just becomes really confusing.
I agree with you. There is no consistent method of management or oversight of the rules and regulations, and it does make it very confusing. And you could argue it's designed almost to catch you out, and it does. Many people do get called out, and sometimes I think it's very unfair. But there is no easy way of being able to challenge this other than taking it to court.
Yeah, I know. Also, on the other side, I know the private car parking association or something like that. They're trying to come together and write their own rules, aren't they? So they govern by their own rules, which again and again they come up with a new set of rules, and then they complain 2 years later that it's not working for themselves. So there just seems to be no easy answer. You know, there must be a way of simplifying. Just park in your car. Do you have to pay and how to pay it? Surely it's not that complicated.
I think so, but at the moment, like you say, there is lots of different rules, lots of different regulations, depending on who's operating the car park. But there is a huge wave of disenchantment with the way that private car park companies seem to look to try and catch you out. And like you say, it ranges from poor signage to confusing rules and regulations, which do seem to be designed to catch you out.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to put the results of this survey, and people can obviously comment on whether you see this on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you see it. Let us know what you're thinking. And we're going to carry on these conversations about different things, because it just made me think about public transport and different ways you're paying for them. And they were going to close the kiosk up at Truro until the RMT union and all that got really involved and all that. There's so many things out there that I'm sure in good faith, I genuinely believe in good faith they are trying to help, but they've got to listen and they've got to try to, and you make it easier for disabled people in all kinds of levels, right through to, mainly we're talking about physical here today, but somebody got hold of me the other day and they said they can't even read the screen of one of the parking meters because the top of the shelter is see-through. That's another thing, and that would affect everybody. So
this is why I personally am a great champion of co-production, because I think when somebody comes up with a concept of an idea of whatever, it doesn't matter whether it's a service or what it is, if you design it, if you from the concept through to the design stage, build stage or implementation stage, view stage, if you involve the users of those services or venues, then you get a right first time approach. Potentially save millions of pounds in doing so. It's when you consultation is a pretty low way or ineffective way of asking people for advice on what should be done, and involving people at the very early concept stage all the way through, usually 9 times out of 10 will lead to a service or a venue that's fit for purpose and cost effective in the long term. May cost more in the early stages, but long term saves money overall.
Yeah, save a lot of money having to change things, not having to change things later on. So for me, my 2 takeaways, that if you're watching this from Cornwall Council perspective or any perspective or a business, my 2 takeaways here is, if it's easy, if we can use it, it makes it easier for everybody. Whether you're able-bodied or anything. Bear that in mind. You're not just doing it for us, you're doing it for everybody. And secondly, the purple pound. We got money to spend. We will spend it. And that's the lowest figure we can find is £140 million in Cornwall, not including the tourists that visit here. That's a huge amount of money in the economy of Cornwall.
You shouldn't ignore that by making all accessible parking free, the council could lose up to circa about £1 million, but that's overshadowed by the potential economic benefit that making Blue Badge parking free would bring to the businesses in let's use Truro. If you could bring some of that income into Truro, less businesses would fold and you'd have more sustainability within the business community in Truro. And that's got to have an economic benefit and a financial spin-off to the council in the long term, rather than just looking at how much they may lose in the short term.
And also, just to add to that, because you're totally right on every level there, just to add the well-being of us being able to get out and make it easier. A lot of these car parks, they're talking about transferring. And I know they're not talking about taking away things, but there was potential that they could. We have to wait and see what happens. That's going to be our next discussion. But a lot of these are on the coast. The well-being and the health of people getting out and us getting out, that has a huge saving to the NHS, but it's just hard to quantify it sometimes.
It is. But that's an argument for another day, Steve, I think.
Absolutely.
This was a opportunity to talk about the Blue Badge parking survey, which I'm pretty bowled over by the number of people who responded, and I think it's provided some really useful facts that could be used by the council, by Disability Cornwall, and by businesses as well, to lobby those that are responsible, and to take forward an argument of why Blue Badge holders need better facilities that are perhaps free, that are perhaps easier to apply for, and to move forward so that everybody is more included, and so it has a financial benefit to all.
And 80% have said in that survey that they will go elsewhere if they cannot park.
The number of blue badge holders that visit supermarkets, and I think it speaks volumes. They're not in Truro, they're in the out of town shopping centres, and they're spending their purple pound there, and they're not spending them in the towns and the cities, and that should make the business community sit up and take note and join with those affected in lobbying the council for better provision.
Yeah. So on a personal note, Steve, thank you. It's been a long time coming that we get together and have a good chat.
Yeah. You think we live the other end of the country, let alone
you would think so, wouldn't you?
Miles apart. But there you go. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the opportunity.
Right. Take care, Steve, and thank you, everybody.